Hear from former CIA and NSA Director Michael Hayden. He has a new book out called Playing to the Edge, American Intelligence in the Age of Terror. Just about to get underway live here on C-SPAN.
Would you like a soda? Thank you. Oh, we're live.
Hey. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. I'm Mark Thiessen. I'm a fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute, and we're pleased to be joined today by former CIA and NSA Director Michael Hayden. With the events in Europe this week, I can't think of anyone better than Mike to enlighten us and put everything that we're seeing on our television screens into perspective. So, Mike, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So you have a new book out called Playing to the Edge. What motivated you to write that book, and what does Playing to the Edge mean?
Sure. So the brief version in terms of motivation, why this book, in the foreword, which I actually wrote at the end, the manuscript was already done, and Penguin says, so why'd you write this book? All right. I talk about being in Alice Springs, Australia, in the outback there, at a joint facility. The Australians call Pine Gap, we call Alice. I mean, it's really in the outback. You land at the airport, you get on, let me choose my words carefully here, the road, all right? And you come to a T, Alice 12K, Ayers Rock 750. I mean, it's way out there. And we were having a Five Eyes schmooze, and we were walking off the ops floor into the brilliant outback sun, and I turned to my Australian counterpart and said, wouldn't you like to take your citizens in there and show them what those kids are doing? And of course the answer was, yeah. Well, that's kind of the book. In the longer form of this, and I'll spare you this because this is a very knowledgeable audience, I don't know of something so essential to American democracy that is less well known by the American population than American espionage. And so the purpose of the book is to walk up to the cipher lock, punch in numbers, bring my countrymen to the degree allowed by law and policy inside that zone, introduce them to the people and to many of the things they do on their behalf. That's really the objective, Mark. And it comes back to rarely has something so essential been so consistently misunderstood.
And so you called it Playing to the Edge. What does Playing to the Edge mean?
Yeah.
Are we playing to the edge today?
Yeah, that's my wife's title. She's the one who put that on there. But she had read the manuscript, and I said, they're asking for a title now, too. Yeah. And that's what she put. And it's a reflection of her reading of the manuscript and, frankly, the conversations we had had over the last 10 years. Okay? And in essence, the summary is the intel guys don't get to create any edges. Edges are created by the American political process, by the American democratic process. But once you've gotten those lines, here are your limits. When circumstances dictate, you have a moral responsibility to play all the way to the lines. Even though you know when you do that, it is inevitable that you're going to have an ugly hearing, an ugly op-ed, probably on one or the other coast. It hardly ever shows up in the Omaha World Herald, all right? From one paper or another along the coast. And frankly, your life is going to be less pleasant than it would otherwise be. But Mark, the point I make in the book is, if you play back from the edge, you may be defending yourself or maybe even protecting your agency. Mm-hmm. But you're not protecting America. And so there is this moral dilemma, moral compulsion, that if the government authorizes it and the situation demands it, you got to go all the way to the edge, otherwise you're not doing your duty.
You've used the phrase getting chalk on your cleats.
Yeah. Actually, when CBS very kindly, Penguin arranged a session with CBS Sunday Morning, and it was a very generous piece. David Martin, the Pentagon correspondent, did it. David and I flew up to Pittsburgh, my hometown, and we filmed a big chunk of it at the Steelwork practice facility. Okay, and one of the B-roll elements of the morning show was my walking along the sideline with David at the practice facility. And one of the conversations we had that did not make it into the final product, but as we were walking along, I said, "No, David, those are the hash marks. If you're really, really conservative and you're really, really concerned, you could tell your team, I want to avoid any potential mistakes, so I do not want to see that ball moved outside of the hash marks. You can run all the plays you want, but the ball's not going out beyond the hash." And I said, "David, I know how that game's going to end. All right? That team's going to lose badly. You've got to use the whole field." So anyway, that's why the language, Mark.
So one place where they don't seem to have a lot of chalk on their cleats these days is Europe.
Sorry.
Didn't mean to make you choke up your water. So, the 4 days before this week's attack in Brussels, they captured the logistics chief of the cell that had carried out the Paris attacks and that was behind the Brussels attack. And he was immediately given a lawyer, told he had the right to remain silent, spent the first night in a hospital, second day in a judicial hearing, and then was put in the criminal justice system. And during those 4 days, he successfully protected the information that he clearly had about the cell, how it operates, how it moves, and the attack happened. I mean, isn't this something of an indictment of the law enforcement approach to terrorist interrogation?
Well, the answer is yes, comma. All right, so let me develop the thought. I think your premise is probably true. I don't know the fine print, but I think this attack, which was very sophisticated, clearly to my eye had already matured to a certain point. I think it was put in motion because they feared he was going to say something that would then interfere with it. But this was a fully grown plot. I mean, this did not get cooked up Sunday night in somebody's basement. This had a lot of work done. So I think you're right. He knew, they knew he knew, they feared, and therefore they acted. God, there's so many ways of coming at the question you just asked me. So I'm going to go kind of stream of consciousness on you.
Yep.
There's an extended passage in the book where, when I'm director of CIA and I get to go to the German embassy here, the Germans are in the chair of the EU, and so Ambassador Sharioth, who is the German ambassador, is frankly bringing the Euro bubbas in every 2 weeks for lunch. So it's the ambassadors from the Union to the U.S. every 2 weeks, lunch on the Germans. And the ambassador, I'm sure they had Euro conversations, but from time to time, he would bring in an American. All right, I suspect Bob Gage may have shown up, Condi may. So now they bring in me, the CIA guy. And we really took this very seriously. I mean, we could have been entertaining and talked about soft topics and building deeper intelligence cooperation. And I went with renditions, detentions, and interrogations. Okay? Feeling as if I'm never going to have this chance again.
Yeah.
And it was a very candid, very polite, very respectful, very valuable conversation. But about page 2 or 3 of my notes, I still have the speech. Because this, as you know, we had good speechwriters. All right? But this is one I kind of did some personal work on. About page 2 or 3, I just say to the collected Europeans, look, let's be very candid. Let me tell you what I believe, my agency believes, my government believes, and frankly, what I believe my country believes. We are a nation at war. We are at war with al-Qaeda and its affiliates. This war is global in scope, and I can only fulfill the responsibilities I have to my citizens to take this fight to that enemy wherever they may be. War, al-Qaeda, global, take the fight. There was not another country in the room that agreed with any of those 4 sentences. Okay? They not only rejected them for themselves, but clearly felt that we were not on solid legal ground in terms of applying them to us. And so you do have this dichotomy between ourselves and the Europeans. There's another part in the book where I talk about targeted killings, and an example I have to use is one that's made public, was the killing of a Shabab later in September of 2009 by Navy SEALs. All right? There really was no attempt to capture. This was a kill operation. And I make the point that there is not an intelligence service in Europe that would have given us information to enable that raid. It would have been unlawful under their law to enable the Americans to do something they viewed to be an illegitimate use of force. So you do have this sharp dichotomy between the North American view and the European view of what this really is. Now we get our own scrum here because we got a lot of Americans who claim if we don't do this in a law enforcement model, we are therefore being lawless, which I take on the books, and that's not true at all. There's another whole body of law that we can depend on, the law of armed conflict. All right, so that's one point. I'm sorry, it's a long answer.
No, go ahead.
The second point is this. I think the Europeans have an incredibly pathological structural problem. And by pathological, I'm using the literal meaning. It will lead to the death of the organism unless you fix it. All right? And the pathological problem is this. It is the division of labor between Brussels as a European capital, not the victim, between Brussels and the sovereign states. The sovereign states have exported to Brussels some big chunks of their sovereignty. All right? They've exported to Brussels all questions of commerce, a lot of questions about finance and money, and frankly, all questions with regard to privacy. All right? When we have a dialogue with the Europeans, we're talking to Brussels, the European Commission of this or that or the other thing. National security remains in the capitals. It remains a national responsibility. And the pathology I see, and I've actually said this to European friends over the last couple of years, is that you've got a bunch of folks up here in the Euro institutions making declarations about essential privacy and what constitutes essential privacy, freed from the burdens of guaranteeing the safety of their citizens. Now, we got issues here, okay? But we get the privacy mavens and the security mavens in the same room and really have ugly fights. The Europeans don't. You have this body up here creating rules, all right, in which the only imperative is how much privacy can we guarantee? And then you've got these folks down here who then have to live with those rules. And they've got the rules that have been developed, I think, I'm overstating this probably a bit, but rules that have been developed largely absent security considerations. That is another, in addition to, we think it's a war, they don't, all right? Even within the law enforcement model, you've got limits on what the nations can do to protect themselves. And then I'm funneling down. Now I am in Brussels, the victim. And that, frankly, is a small, under-resourced, from time to time, dysfunctional security service working for what is almost all the time a dysfunctional government.
So you have
and
people,
so now you've got real issues here.
So you have people who have no responsibility for the actual preventing of attacks,
right,
who are tying the hands of the people who do. And so when they can't then prevent the attack, then they're really responsible, but they're not.
So what I think is going to happen, Mark, you know, you've got the Grexit, Brexit, and fill in the blank exit on the monetary union, and we may or may not have patched that over. Okay, the Schengen thing now is creating torque because they've exported border security to the Euro institutions, and now they're feeling very uncomfortable about it. And so that's going to create torque on the union as it's currently constructed. And I think, Mark, as they think through what I just said, this privacy security torque is also now going to create great tension within the union. And put another way, unless the union adapts to what it is, I think I just fairly pointed out, this is going to get worse and lead, frankly, to the crippling of the union, besides whatever it might do with police powers and so on.
So the logistics chief that was captured, he is what we would have called in the CIA context a high-value detainee, somebody who had information about the whereabouts, locations, identities, and so on and so forth. When we captured a high-value detainee, not only did we not read them their rights, we didn't announce their capture necessarily, because we knew that if you did, then if people knew that that one of their compatriots, especially an important one, was captured, they would begin closing down intelligence trails, shutting down email accounts. They might even accelerate their plans for an attack. So in Europe, we had a situation where not only did they announce his capture, but you had every European leader in the world holding a press conference saying he's cooperating, he's giving us information, telling us all these things, which likely accelerated the attack. So isn't this, one, is that a mistake? And two, doesn't this show the need for secret detention?
So there are lots of things you can go back and rerun the video and say, meh, not so much, not so much. You can imagine the political pressure on local leaders to show progress, to show competency, or at least claim competency in terms of we're doing this and we're doing that. But I agree with you. In a world in which you are still focused on security and in which you don't know where the next shoe is going to fall, these tend to be self-defeating things. I have to freely admit, Mark, if we'd have picked him up in Waziristan or Somalia and so on, I would buy totally into what Mark said. Now, that is not current American policy. All right, that's not how we do it, but I would buy in. There is a fair argument that if he had been picked up because of the energies of American law enforcement as opposed to foreign intelligence, and he had been picked up in the homeland, I'm running up a much steeper hill to claim we should begin a detention inside the American intelligence services. And that's just a practical matter inside how we Americans view ourselves and how we pick between using the law enforcement model and the law of armed conflict model. It would even here, Mark, even at CIA, it would have been a tougher case to make to use the law of armed conflict model for someone who was arrested by American law enforcement inside the United States.
So we had done
and all
that.
that said, but all that said, one needs to make a judgment based upon the totality of circumstances that you find yourself in at the time. The complaint people like me have is not that we did or didn't do that in this particular case. It's that we don't do it in any case. And then we've taken that tool off the table. People talk to me about, would you like to get the techniques back? And I just stopped the conversation and said, well, first of all, I'd like to capture somebody. Okay? That we are not already committed to putting through an Article III court process. Right?
That seems to be missing today. But there is, of course, the Obama administration, quite frankly, got caught in this same criticism in 2009 when the underwear bomber, where they immediately read him his rights. And
clearly a mistake.
And was a mistake. And even the Obama administration today, if they capture somebody, doesn't necessarily read them their rights on the first day.
So that's right. And that's kind of a palliative to the stress point Mark just described for you. But I'm a little worried. I like Miranda. Okay? I don't want Miranda adjusted casually. Miranda protects me and you. All right? And so rather than turning the dial back on Miranda because you've chosen to do this through a law enforcement model, but we're going to go light on Miranda, I don't want the feds getting in the habit of going light on Miranda. Okay? I think the solution is, rather than fooling with something on which we all rely, why don't you begin the process over here in the law of armed conflict model, where Miranda doesn't apply. And of course, anything you develop will never be used in a court of law.
Exactly.
And at some point later, you want to put them in the law enforcement process. Frankly, from my point of view, I truly don't care.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's the difference between the law enforcement approach and the intelligence-driven approach, which is in the law enforcement approach, you're capturing somebody after an attack has happened, and you're trying to get them to cooperate to provide evidence for a criminal conviction. And so you have time as a friend because you can build rapport and do all these things, and at that when you're in an intelligence situation,
and you can coerce. And you can coerce. Do not believe that the law enforcement model is free of coercion. I'm going to arrest your mother. I'm going to arrest your father. Your kids are going to jail.
Well, you can even do more than in the law enforcement model than the intelligence model today, because under the Army Field Manual, for example, district attorneys every day say to somebody, would you rather be in a federal prison or would you rather be in the general population in Rikers Island? Or if you cooperate, we'll take the death penalty off the table. That would be threatening a detainee.
That's right. Mark's right. That would be forbidden in the Army Field Manual. Yeah.
So with the benefit of 20 hindsight, we look back now and we can see with that benefit, you can see 9/11 coming. You had the first World Trade Center attacks, you had the USS Cole, you had the embassy bombings and other signs that this was coming. So now here we are, and we've had the Paris bombings, and we've had the Brussels bombings. And it seems like this story is repeating itself. The Director of National Intelligence testified a few months ago that it is likely that ISIS will try a directed attack against the United States in 2016. General DNI Clapper has said that they're not going to be satisfied with lone wolves, that they want to have directed attacks. Are we sort of reliving this movie?
Yeah, no, we are. So a couple of thoughts. Reflected in the book, but not specifically. I mean, it's consistent with the thinking, but, this is post-manuscript. A couple of things. And I'll try to be very efficient, Mark, because I know you've got a lot of questions. If this is the degree of threat under which we exist, I'm pretending this is where we were on September 10th, 2001. And then through the efforts of two somewhat different administrations, okay, we got better. We really did. All right? And about 2011, we got about here. Since about 2011, it's going back up. Right? Now, here is not here. We are not yet to that point, Mark. We are safer than we were on September 10th. We all, however, are less safe than we were in 2011, 2012, 2013. So if that's what you meant by your question, the answer is yes. We're kind of going through the same cycle. Now, in terms of what it is we do about it, I tried to do this extended metaphor on Morning Joe 2 days ago, and I only had 3 minutes. So, so here's the metaphor. If you take everything Mark just talked about, why didn't you do this to the guy? Why didn't you hold him? How come the Belgians can't do wiretaps? How far do you want to put the metal detectors out from the airport now? Right? Let's think of soccer. We just had an argument about stopping penalty kicks. Or at a minimum, we talked about we need a bigger, stronger, faster goalie because somebody just put the thing in the back of the net. And the trend line, and here's the point I would go to the Europeans with, Mark. The trend line is when something like this happens, you start talking about goalies. All right? How come you didn't know it was this guy? How come you didn't have better security at the airport? Why didn't you arrest him sooner? Why the politicians make statements and so on? That is all right. If it's not PKs, it's still within the 18, and somebody's got a real high opportunity to score. I get it. Practice defense, get some better fullbacks, train your goalie, but that's not a winning hand. All right. If you're playing inside the 18 or you're playing to stop penalty kicks, y'all know what's going to happen. It's going to go back in the back of the net again. So the extended metaphor is control the midfield. Okay? Move the game up. And the metaphor for controlling the midfield is to do all those things you ought to be doing before the attacks. Things like what? Espionage, collecting metadata, comparing the metadata with known, you guys know this stuff, okay? You do all those things that a lot of our European friends are wringing their hands about. So I'm less inclined, I might criticize the Belgiques for what they did immediately. I'm less inclined to criticize them for what their police did in that 96-hour period. I am more inclined to say now, you want to have that conversation you thought you had 2 years ago about electronic surveillance? Okay. Yeah. You want to do it now with maybe a better handle on what the real facts are and why this is being done? Okay. I just thought the soccer metaphor would work better in Europe than baseball. Okay. And I mean it. That stuff that became so controversial is about controlling the midfield. David Ignatius had a wonderful piece in the Post 2 days ago in which he said, after this, all the Europeans are now lining up in front of the American intelligence Leviathan and demanding more product while still wringing their hands about my American collection. Okay? So control the midfield. Let me extend the metaphor.
Yeah.
I got one more. And after you have established control of the midfield, and you can blunt attacks well before they get into your airports or even into your sovereign space, why don't you think about scoring goals? Why don't you get into the attacking zone? Okay? Why don't you begin to threaten their goal mouth rather than worrying about yours? In other words, aggressively take this fight to this, back to my speech in the German embassy, take this fight to this enemy where they reside, which means get real tough in Raqqa, get real tough in Mosul, get real tough with the Islamic State. I'm going to be overly dramatic, all right? And maybe this isn't a good idea, but here it comes. You know, I would not be opposed that if we use social media, if we use traditional leaflets, and we blanket that part of the earth called the Islamic State with the notification, if you move oil, you're going to die. Period. I think that's a legitimate act in the armed conflict in which we are engaged, and you make it very clear that we're actually really serious about this now. So, in any event, the point I was trying to make is a lot of the conversation here gets dragged down to the last 18 yards. Actually, the real answers are deeper, and they harken back to those faux discussions and faux debates we had over somebody's cell phone or some country's metadata or who was vacuuming up whatever.
So the administration would argue to you that they are getting tough in those places. They just killed the #2 leader of ISIS.
Yeah.
They claim that they've taken back 40% of ISIS's territory, and all to the good. However, you know, it's a little bit like after you let a cancer go untreated for many months, that you've reduced the tumor by 40%, but oh, by the way, it was in your lungs.
Yeah.
You reduced it there, but it's spread to your liver, your stomach, and your brain. Brussels, Paris, and wherever the next attack is. Is that really something to be celebrating? Or, you know, do we need to hit these things before they metastasize?
Yeah, you're already asking me a political question as opposed to an intelligence question, and I'll give you a political answer. Professionally, I think you could fairly characterize our effort against ISIS as what we call a level of effort campaign. Okay, we have been told we're going to do that much. Okay, big guy, go do everything you can with that much and under these rules. I would say, and there's probably some good friends of mine in uniform who would disagree with me, who are on the inside now. I would say we are not working backward from the desired effects we wish to create, and then therefore resourcing and governing our effort based upon the desired outcomes. It is, here's what we can offer, here are the rules, go do the best you can. And we're actually good. I mean, I've said in another venue recently, I got to be part of the most magnificent killing machine in the history of armed conflict. And even restricted and under-resourced, we're a hell of a killing machine. And so we are going to inflict losses on this enemy. But I think I'm disappointed with the pace and the level of effort. A good friend of mine, Dave Deptula, Dave did the planning for Gulf War I. I'm seeing folks nod here. They recognize Dave. Dave did Gulf War I. If Dave were here, he would say that the current air campaign is like a fine Irish mist when air power was invented by God to be a thunderstorm. Okay. and when you think of it, all right, we are hitting at the rate of about 20 strikes per day. All right? That's modest. At best. And so I would have amped it up. Something else I would do too is I would move the threshold with regard to our tolerance for collateral damage. From the outside looking in, I think the right number for collateral damage right now for the ROEs is 0. And I would make the argument that may not be a moral position, because if you pass up multiple opportunities because of fear of collateral damage, you may actually end up with more dead innocent people because you have not suppressed the enemy's capacity to do harm because of your almost total allergy to collateral damage. Now, Mark, you and I have talked about this in other fora. These are always hard choices, all right? And it's really unfair to second guess, but you asked, all right? And so that's kind of my by the way, this is one war where the kinetic fight is ideological. Okay? This is one war where the battlefield defeat of the enemy actually undercuts the ideological jihadist narrative. These guys are somebody because they're successful, and they can advertise themselves as representing both the will and the hand of God. Nothing undercuts that like battlefield defeat.
Exactly. The other thing is that they can, if they know the rules of engagement are no civilian casualties, and when they think that there's a drone flying over or a plane flying overhead, they go into a school or a hospital or something like that.
And we know they have well-practiced intermingling their presence in Raqqa, for example, with civilian targets.
No, that's exactly right. So, you say we're better in protecting the homeland now than we were before 9/11, and that's why we're safer, though the threat is rising. But isn't the threat becoming much more complex than it was then? So, like before 9/11, we faced a danger from one terrorist network, principally operating in one country, principally Afghanistan. Today, the threat is metastasized. ISIS is now spread out from Iraq and Syria, but all over the world. But you also have all the Al-Qaeda affiliates, Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda in the... So we now face a danger from multiple terrorist networks operating in multiple countries, and also the new dynamic of free market competition in the jihadi world, which is you have two major terrorist networks, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that are competing with each other for the hearts and minds of the faithful. And how do you win that fight? By hitting us, right?
Yeah, all true. Yeah, it is more complex. I read the CIA press clips every morning before I get out of bed. I go down and get my wife coffee, come back. She says, anything interesting in the clips? Very frequently, very recently, my response is, oh yes. Yet another great day to be a former senior intelligence official. Because of what you've just described there. Yeah. Okay, let me riff on that a little bit, all right? As much as I've said what I've just said here, I and people like me understand you cannot kill your way out of this problem. If we could kill our way out of this problem, this thing had been over 14 years ago. And so there are other broad issues, Mark, that we have to take on. And I think everyone in this room would agree we are less good at that than we are about the killing people thing. And so that's a part of our game that we really need to recharge. It's a part of our game over which we don't have direct control. It's a part of our game in which we are far more dependent upon our allies in the Islamic world to achieve success than any success we can personally achieve. So to begin that conversation, one of the things I think we have to do is to get over the fantasy that this has nothing to do with Islam. Okay? By the way, the response to this has nothing to do with Islam is they all hate us. Okay? And I frankly believe that this begets that, and they're both wrong. All right? And so I think what we need is just kind of an adult acceptance of, no, this has something to do with Islam. Now, it's not about all of Islam, and for God's sake, it's not about all Muslims. But it does have something to do with Islam, and we need to talk to our Muslim allies about this. For God's sake, the King of Jordan says it has something to do with Islam. He says there's a civil war within Islam. The president of Egypt is wagging his fingers at the theological faculty at Al-Azhar saying it is about Islam, and you guys fix it. Because these crazies are denigrating, and I'm very careful how I say this, being a North American Christian, all right, that I understand this is one of the world's great monotheisms. But there is a struggle within that monotheism as to how it wants to deal with certain issues. We cannot resolve it, but I don't think we serve anybody by pretending that's not what's happening. And therefore, perhaps we can help empower those voices within Islam that we think actually have the best answer, not just for ourselves, but for Islam. People like the King of Jordan, and so on. So there's a lot to be done. And I guess what I'm saying is the complexity is beyond the battlefield threat complexity. There is a deeper complexity, and our tools to influence that are indirect and distant.
And also empowering people at the even more local level.
Yeah.
So, the number one victims of Islamic radicalism are Muslims. They're killing more Muslims than they are people in the West, at least for now, right?
I would offer you a view, probably that much hyperbolic, all right, but not without truth, that we are merely collateral damage. We are the collateral damage in what is fundamentally a war within one of the world's great monotheisms.
But like, for example, and one of the reasons the surge was so successful in 2007 in Iraq was because it was both a military and an ideological defeat for ISIS, Al-Qaeda, which became ISIS.
Yeah.
That they were not only defeated militarily, but they were rejected by the very people that they claimed to represent.
Whom should have been most attracted, the Sunni
Exactly.
tribes.
The Sunni tribes. So they came to call the Sunni masses to drive the U.S. out. And instead, the Sunni masses joined with America to drive Al-Qaeda out.
Right.
So that was a major ideological defeat. So how can we empower people in the Muslim world who hate ISIS, who hate Al-Qaeda, who hate Islamic radicalism, to join us in that fight?
Well, listen to Woody Allen. His fundamental tenet about life is 85% is showing up. And so I do think, and I realize that's different from saying, out of our way, our friends, the pros from Dover are here, we're going to go fix this. That's even worse. But I do think, given historical circumstances, given who we are in the world right now, all right, which is not a permanent condition, okay, and doesn't indicate any special blessing from the Creator that we're more special than anyone else, but given the reality of the world in which we now live and the relative power that we can exert, our showing up creates opportunities for things to happen. Our not showing up actually cuts in the other direction, and in fact might even be a negative, because then others begin to go do things on their own, and it turns out they're not all that good at it. And then they make, I'm suggesting invading Yemen, for example. It makes the situation worse than it would otherwise be. So I do think there is a powerful role for American leadership here. Mm-hmm. I am not calling for the return of maneuver brigades to the western Iraqi desert, but I do think there is a powerful role to play. I do not understand, and by the way, this is all beyond the context of the book, which kind of closes out with Snowden, so that's in there. I do not understand the lack of a safe area. I do not understand the lack of a no-fly zone. You know, things that I think broadly would be accepted by what I would call the civilized world, Christian, Jew, or Islamic.
So you have accomplished something that not a single GOP presidential candidate has done, which is you got Donald Trump to back down. So Donald Trump said that he would employ waterboarding or worse, and he openly uses the word torture for what he would advocate as president. And you pointed out that the U.S. military would not obey a command to break the law,
right.
And he backed down off of that, but says now we got to change the laws to allow torture.
Yeah.
So is that playing to the edge or going well beyond it?
You got a copy of my book there? No, we don't copy.
We do somewhere.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's okay. I'll pretend. All right. I'll do hand puppets here. Here we go. So I'm on this here book tour, right?
Yep.
And my wife kindly says, "Call it playing to the edge, dummy." Okay. So, and I actually thought that I was going to have to spend the book tour explaining our collective aggressiveness in going to the edge. That didn't happen. Because of the dynamics of the political campaign, the book tour was more or less consumed by my explaining that there were edges. that there were things, no, we're not going to go do that. So rather than, explaining why we were here, right, I was explaining why we would never be here. Right? It was an incredibly remarkable thing. And so the easy one is, and we're going to kill their families too. Oh, for God's sake. I mean, that's the one where Bill Maher asked me, and I said, no, Bill, that's just not going to happen. The American military would just not do that. And that's different from ratcheting up your bar for collateral damage. Right? I already told you my view on that. I would be more willing to embrace a bit more risk for the desired military effect. But that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about killing the innocent. Now, that's bad. I mean, just morally. But it's incredibly stupid operationally. You still are mad for 9/11. All right? And we're 15 years. Right? Why do we want to create that dynamic inside of our enemy? By our going to go killing their non-combatants. The tougher sell was his call for waterboarding, which I do talk about in the book, and which my agency did, which we did take off the table, but which I justify as having been effective and then defend the people who did it. there it's a little more nuanced, and I haven't had as much chance to get into it, so I'm going to do it here. Okay? He's doing it with enthusiasm. We did it with regret. He's doing it because they deserve it. We never did it because they deserved it. We did it because we felt they knew something that we had a right to know in order to keep our citizens safe. He appears to want to do it frequently. We did it rarely to 3 folks. I mean, his language on waterboarding was so bad that it actually gave waterboarding a bad name. Okay? And I recognize, and there's a lot of language in the book that bows deeply to people who object to our having done that. And I give that the greatest respect. All I argue, and Mark, you know this, all I argue is that we did it based upon, out of duty, not enthusiasm. We did it based upon the legal judgment we had at the time, all right? And it did, in fact, lead to information. I still get it. A really honorable opinion is don't do it, ever. That's off. Okay? And by the way, right now, U.S. law says it's off. Yeah. You can't do it. All right? I also make the point, and I made the point on the book tour, and I actually make it in the book, that if a future president decides that he was going to return to this, and he somehow creates the legal framework where it is no longer unlawful, I say quite specifically, he better bring his own bucket, because the CIA is not going to do it again. Because as I explain in the back 2 or 3 chapters of the book, the people who did this in good faith, believing that they were covered by their government and by their government's legal opinion, felt an undying sense of betrayal about what happened to them after the change of administrations. So there was a show on Showtime called Spy Masters around Thanksgiving. Talked to all 12 former living directors. We didn't meet with one another. They interviewed us separately. They interviewed us a long time, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. So we're not sure how this is going to turn out. As it turns out, it's very good. We're very happy with it. But they've got several of us saying, we'll CIA waterboard again. No. And that was not a rejection of the judgments made, the actions performed, and the intelligence derived in the past. It was, we thought when we did this thing for you, the big U, 320 million U, we had a social contract in perpetuity that the Republic had our back. Turns out in perpetuity is one off-year election cycle. And the agency has taken a no-fooling lesson from that. So it's a very complicated issue, Mark, and the most offensive part of the current debate is how stupidly oversimplified the discussion has been made.
But also for Trump, for us, waterboarding was the far end point, the closest to the edge. For Trump, it's the starting point.
Oh, no, I agree, yeah. I could add to my yin and yang here, rare, often, punishment, intelligence, reluctant, enthusiastic, endpoint, launch pad. Yeah.
But the reality is that we do need some sort of an interrogation program for terrorists that doesn't include waterboarding today, but that does something more than the Army Field Manual. If we're going to prevent another 9/11, we're going to have to start capturing people again. We're going to have to start interrogating them. We can't just read them their rights. And what Trump is doing, people who disagree with what was done by the agency, they have to at least acknowledge there was a line. And the government, whether you can disagree where the line should have been, the government did acknowledge a line, stay within a line, and try to do that. Trump wants to just erase the line, and so doesn't that undermine our ability to actually create something that we need that's much more limited?
Hence back to my statement that I will probably regret about he's giving waterboarding a bad name, but that's my point. Yeah. All right, he is poisoning what has to be a very carefully crafted, deeply conscientious conversation by a free people as to what it is you think is or is not legitimate based upon the totality of circumstances in which you find yourself. This pulls us back away from that discussion and poisons it. And so yeah, I agree.
Well, let's talk about something that's on the minds of everybody here who has an iPhone, which is the fight between FBI and Apple. They're trying to get the unlock the phone of the San Bernardino shooter. And this has been painted as a dispute between the tech world and the national security world. But in the tech world, you've had people like Bill Gates who have been saying that Apple ought to be doing more. And in the national security world, we've had people like you who have actually backed Apple. Explain that to us.
This sounds like, where were you on the night of September? I mean, this sounds a little like an interrogation here. I do shade towards Apple, and I don't believe it betrays any inconsistency on my part. There are many ways of looking at the, I'm not going to explain the question. This audience knows the question, right? All right. There are many ways of looking at the question. There is a constitutional question, okay? I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm not going there. If you ask my opinion, I think the government has it within its authority to compel Apple to do what they want Apple to do. And if it doesn't yet have it, Congress can make it so. All right, so I don't think there's a constitutional question, although Apple is throwing up, what, the First, Fourth, and 13th Amendments to the Constitution, including involuntary servitude. Right? I don't think there's a privacy issue here. He's dead. There are no privacy issues. And, by the way, it was never his phone. So I don't think the specific act here begins to engage questions of security versus privacy. Okay? I'm over here looking at this purely in a security lens. I think it would be a good thing if the government could get that. I think the government has the authority to demand it. I just think it's a bad idea. And it's a bad idea because Jim Clapper, for the last 2 or 3 years, has said the most serious threat to American safety and security is cyber. Now you have a private company who apparently has developed a pretty good cryptographic system because government can't get into it. And now the government is going to demand that this company create something that doesn't yet exist, which is a way to get through. Now, I understand it's suppressing the iOS, it's opening up to brute force attacks. We're not going to go there. All I'm saying is, when Apple is done, this will be less secure than it was. And it will be less secure even if you keep it over here and it requires multiple keys and you have to go to a court and yada, yada, yada. All right? The fact that you've created this, by definition, it is less secure than it would be had you not created it. As director of NSA, when we were going after a really tough algorithm and, oh man, we're probably not going to be able to break this thing. And then I had one of my crippies come in and say, oh, we just found out that someone else has been granted, the technical term here, has been granted extraordinary access through the encryption. Okay? My response was, thank you, Lord. Okay? Because by the way, that may not be enough, but the odds of my getting in have been increased because I have additional tools, different paths that I can use to get beyond the encryption. When this began, I wanted to side with the Bureau. And the theory under which I was trying to side with the Bureau was, this is good, this is bad, and I'm not sure that this inevitably leads to that. But the longer this has gone on, the more I'm convinced this is not a one and done. First of all, Director Comey has testified in open session that yes, indeed, although we're only asking for this phone, this will establish a precedent that we will use in other cases. There are at least a dozen of these around the country that will immediately be brought into a courtroom. And Mr. Vance, the U.S. Attorney up in Manhattan, says he's got a room with 175 just waiting to go. So I don't think it's a one and done. And again, I was trying to stay over here, but now I'm convinced it can't stay over here. This inevitably leads to a less secure operating system. I can do this 2 or 3 more revs, and I will very, very briefly. Let's just say that I'm wrong. Okay? Let's just say that we as a nation decide, nah, tell them to open the damn phone. All right? What it is we have just done, either through legislation or court order, is that we have forbidden technological progress. I'm just not feeling good about that being a winning hand. Okay? And even if we are successful in doing it in North America, the sum total of all this will be pushing this offshore, which I think is the worst of all possible outcomes we could get. And wait, there's more. If the government does get the authority to do this, what is Apple supposed to do when other governments, for their own legitimate law enforcement reasons, what they perceive to be their own legitimate law enforcement reasons, now come to Apple and say, I got to get in here. It's a Falun Gong guy. You know how bad they are. Let me get in the phone. Or the Egyptian government comes and says, I got to get in here. He's a terrorist. And I'm kind of suggesting that some countries have broad definitions of terrorism. How do you answer that? All right, one more turn of the wheel. It doesn't matter. The march of technology is along an arc in which it will become more and more difficult to retrieve content from intercepted communications. There is nothing we can do to stop that. My counsel, then, to the folks I left behind is, get over it. Understand that no matter what we do with Apple, it's going to get harder and harder to get content. That doesn't mean it's harder. It doesn't mean it's going to be impossible to get actionable intelligence out of intercepted communications. It's just you're not going to be able to get content. Now imagine, Apple has created this problem by creating this really powerful operating system with very powerful encryption. Apple has also given that instrument in your pocket incredible volumes of digital exhaust that are blowing out there right now into the atmosphere that a good intelligence service can collect. I'm not talking about collecting against you, you understand, against foreign targets, that a good intelligence service can collect and glean an incredible volume of information. One more point. Did you ever think the last 15 years were the anomaly? Did you ever think that what's abnormal is the last 15 years, not the 15 years going forward? Did you ever think that what's happened recently is you and I used to keep things that were really well protected and decided to put them up here in our phone where they were readily retrievable. And now we're all regretting that. And the arc we're on here, the major muscle movement we're on here, is simply returning to status quo ante. That we've lived through a period of 10 to 15 years where electronic surveillance, either law enforcement or foreign intelligence, has kind of had a golden age. We all put it up there not knowing how vulnerable it was. Now knowing how vulnerable it was, you're kind of returning to the state back here. You're putting it up there, but you're far more protecting it. All right, so sorry, that's far too long an answer. But for all those, my bottom line is, yeah, I'm kind of shading Apple on this one. By the way, think of all the things that Mike Rogers and Jim Clapper have said about this dispute. Okay, you're done. They have not. This is not fundamentally a foreign intelligence problem. It's a law enforcement problem. The foreign intelligence guys know they can cheat.
So,
we'll talk about the book.
Yeah. Well, play devil. One more question on Apple. Play devil's advocate for a second. Hasn't this backfired on Apple in a big way? In the sense that everyone said, so the FBI put it out there publicly, which everyone criticized them for, saying you should resolve this quietly. And it turns out a third party came to them, and after that put out the word, let's see if we can dig at this, and said we can break into it. So all of a sudden, case stop. Case.
Yeah. Well, A, we'll see if it happens.
Yeah.
All right. B, all right, if I'm still director of NSA and Apple says, no, we're not going to do this, all right, and I'm agreeing, all right, the next phone call, Mark, is down to OMB saying, encryption's getting better. I'm going to need another $500 million because I'm going to kick my way in. So, and that's game on. Yeah. That's fair game. That's different from telling Apple to build something that makes the system less secure. Look, there are so many factors bearing on this. They're actually suggested in the book. There are so many factors bearing on this. We used to do this math, Mark, against encryption that was not universally available. And when you do the math against encryption that's not universally available, game on, kick the door in, all right? But fundamentally, what's happened now is it's against encryption we already depend on. That changes the math problem.
But then there's a challenge of this. Okay, so FBI goes to Apple, says, help us get in. No, we won't help you get in. They go out and find, let's assume for a second this hack works and they can break in. That means Apple has a security vulnerability that the government knows about.
So now
are they going to tell them? No, because they're not going to help them. So why would the FBI
do not presume that answer to that question. All right? That actually may be the government's preferred position for the moment, but we just had this grand debate about NSA and vulnerabilities and what NSA should do or not do when it either creates or discovers a vulnerability in encryption. And the outcome of the national debate has been that NSA has been shading too much in the direction of exploiting the vulnerability rather than fixing it. So I am not convinced.
They should help them. But there's no incentive for them to help Apple right now, because if they figured out a way to get into iPhones, then why would they tell Apple if Apple won't help them?
The incentive to help Apple is their broad moral responsibility to make America a safer and more secure place.
All right. Well, let's talk about the threat environment we face today. So, if you go back back to 1990s, and actually 1988, when George H.W. Bush was running for president, nobody asked him about Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and the presidency is driven by the Persian Gulf War. In 2000, when George W. Bush was running for president, nobody asked about Al-Qaeda. And the 9/11 happened, and the presidency was dominated by the war on terror. Looking at the threat environment today, we're in the middle of a presidential debate. What is it that nobody is asking the candidates about that could end up dominating the next president's term?
I used to get this question in government, all right? and I'd be here with friendly groups like you, and the question is, what do you think's going to surprise you this year, General? So here's the way I answer the question, all right? I got 3 tiers of threat, and my matrix is how bad are they and how much time do I have, okay? Vertical axis, horizontal. How bad, how much time? Tucked down here in the lower left-hand corner are things that are urgent, but not existential. In its current form, cyber. In its current form, terrorism. It could go bump tonight because a TSA kid at Dulles makes a bad decision. But it's not going to threaten the existence of the Republic. I go out 3, 4, 5 years, Mark. I get another flavor of threat. It's a group of nation states that I've taken to label ambitious, brittle, and nuclear. North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, and I actually throw the Russians in there too. Now that's not going to go bump tonight, but if and when it does go bump, it's worse than what we're worried about because of Brussels. But I probably got 3, 4, 5 years to fret, to try to get a handle on them. I go out in the timeline to 10, and way up here in could be really dangerous axis is China. And again, I don't want you to think I'm treating China like Al-Qaeda or China like North Korea. I'm just saying that the accommodation of the People's Republic into a stable global system is the most serious security challenge we have. But we do have some time. Anyway, that's how I kind of bake it. It's not quite the answer. It's not quite an answer to the question that you asked.
Tell me what you don't know, General.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. Okay. So he wants me to make it up. So I do think the Brussels event is going to create incredible torque in the stability of a part of the world that is of incredible importance to the United States. That added to the Schengen torque created by the immigrant crisis, created by the instability within one NATO but not EU member, Turkey. We're going to have to start paying attention to Europe, which we thought was just kind of, well, we don't have to worry about that anymore. And that may be something that's really going to be pushed. You have, let me be kind, populist government movements in several European countries right now that, if they were to be successful, would I think begin to challenge Condi Rice's and George H.W. Bush's vision of a Europe whole and free and at peace.
So let's talk a little bit about the tension between the intelligence community and the press. In the book, you write a great deal about the efforts you went to prevent the New York Times from reporting certain things that were very harmful to national security. But you also say that informed public is the lifeblood of democracy. Yep. So how do we strike the balance between an informed public and the need for secrecy?
So the most important part of the book, going long term, is a conversation I had with Carly Fiorina, who was the head of the CIA Advisory Board, okay, before she became a presidential candidate. And I gave the advisory board tough questions. I gave Carly, and we've talked about this, it's beyond the book, you and I have talked about this. The question I gave Carly was this. This was 07, early 08, this is way pre-Snowden, all right? And I judge Snowden as effect, not cause, all right? Pre-Snowden, I looked at Carly and said, Carly, I got a tough question for you. Will America be able to conduct espionage in the future inside of a broader political culture that every day demands more transparency and more public accountability from every aspect of national life? And they went to the mountaintop or wherever she and her team went, came back 3 or 4 months later. Carly, America be able to conduct espionage, which of course relies on secrecy for success, inside a broader political culture every day demands more transparency and more public accountability. And she looked me right in the eye and said, too close to call, which is really important. Right? In essence, what's happening is our political culture, in terms of what is demanded before it trusts government, is moving out from under the social contract the American intelligence community thought we had with American society. One of the, and again, this is covered pretty thoroughly in the book, NSA was horribly backfooted by the Snowden stuff, and I'm very disappointed that the administration particularly didn't explain things more quickly, more completely, just better. But one of the reasons that NSA was backfooted on the 215 program, that's the metadata stuff, all right, your phone bills, is that this thing had been approved by the president, actually approved by 2 presidents. It had been legislated by Congress. It was well known to the oversight committees, who frankly were the strongest supporters of the program, and overseen by the FISA court. You know, the line I use in the book is, hell, that's the Madisonian trifecta. Check, check, check. We're good to go. That is the Church-Pike solution. You got all those, and what happened when the program became public is a lot of our countrymen, and not all of them out here on the wingnut population, okay, a lot of solid citizens said, I'm not so sure that constitutes consent of the governed anymore. That may be consent of the governors. You told them, but you didn't tell me. And so now we really do have a challenge. How does my old community tell you, the big you, enough about what it is we're doing that we at least have your implied sanction, okay, without telling you so much that it's not worth doing? And that's the question you raise, in my way of rephrasing it, Mark. That's the challenge we now have. My answer, kind of bumper stickerish, is we need to be more transparent. We need to actually tell you more. And then I say very quickly, don't pretend that's not going to make us, that's not going to shave points off of our effectiveness. It will. But then again, you're not going to let us do it anyway unless we tell you more than we tell you already. And I said that at Aspen, and Mike Leiter, and I mentioned his name in the book, Mike Leiter says, I'm with you, Hayden, but not transparent. You need to be translucent. Which is not bad. Translucent. I can see the broad shapes. I can see the broad movements. I can't see the fine print. And so I think what we're trying to find now, Mark, is what's that sweet translucent spot? Mm-hmm. By the way, we'll never get the extremes, but where most Americans say, yeah, I got a pretty good idea what they're doing, I'm okay by it. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. And we do have to find that spot. This is not going to pass. There has been a cultural shift, and I make the point in the book in earnest, and we have to accommodate to it. That's how this works.
Last question for me, then we'll take some from the audience, but playing off of your last point here. Doesn't it seem like the intelligence community is in this vicious cycle? So 9/11 happens, and they say, why didn't you do more? And so you go out and you set up the NSA surveillance program and the metadata program and the CIA interrogation program, and they work. And the attacks don't happen, and the follow-ons are disrupted. And then, over time, people become complacent, and they say, why are you doing all that? You know, my privacy is being infringed, and all these terrible things are happening, and you know, why are you doing that? And then we start peeling them back, and then another attack happens, and we're back to the beginning of the cycle. Is that what we're doing right now?
Yes. And it's a continuous cycle, and I allow myself one existential whine, W-H-I-N-E, in the book, in which I say American political elites, I hardly ever get this at Heinz Field, all right, but American political elites feel free to criticize their intelligence services for not doing enough when they feel in danger, and then immediately turn on a dime and begin to criticize them for doing too much as soon as we made them feel safe again. And I mean, that's kind of harsh, but it's also kind of true. That's kind of where we are.
All right. Well, let's take some questions from the audience. Gentleman here in the front. Do we have microphones?
Thank you very much. Good to see you, General Hayden, again.
Thank you.
Raghuveer, Asia Today. My question is that this war has been going on for the last 20 plus years, and I think CIA knows everything what's going on around the globe. My question here is that it started with Al-Qaeda, then Taliban, and now ISIL, then ISIS, and all those things continue. Do you think that physically maybe Osama bin Laden has been dead, but his ideology still exists among these people? And finally, today Secretary Carter and Chairman also were speaking at the Pentagon press briefing about all these things going on. Finally, who's training them? Where are they getting all these weapons and financing? Who you think today you have to control 2 or 3 nations, then you can control all these terrorists?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. So on the question of you killed bin Laden and then what happened, this is covered a bit in the book. On the night bin Laden was killed, I actually say I was quite surprised with all those kids going to Lafayette Park. I mean, it just, really? And I guess what it betrayed was an attitude of people with our background, knowing that there was no finality in this at all, that everyone was going to go back to work the next morning at Langley and continue the hunt for a whole bunch of other things, whereas the general population felt some sense of closure. Now I guess in one level there is a legitimate sense of closure. After all, he was the guy who was most responsible for the attack, but we never had any sense of closure. We knew this was good, but it was going to be long-standing. I go back to what I said in the book in answer to Mark's question. Until you change conditions on the ground, you just get to kill people forever, and that's not a happy outcome. And so we really do need to begin serious dialogue about changing conditions on the ground. It's not in the book because it postdates the book, but we are seeing the melting down of the world order as we know it. We are seeing the melting of the post-World War II, Bretton Woods, UN, World Bank, American liberal world order. We're seeing the melting down of the post-World War I, Versailles, imposition of the European state system and European-drawn boundaries throughout most of the world. And frankly, we may even be seeing a little thawing on the edges of Westphalia in terms of the separation of the coercive power of the state from matters of theology and definitions of citizenship. And so, this probably isn't about getting Bashar al-Assad out of government. Well, I mean, it is, but it's about so much more. And so I guess my answer to your question is we got to get on with this. We are not going back to where we were. Iraq no longer exists. Syria no longer exists. Probably put Lebanon in there. Certainly put Libya in there. Right? This is not about getting back to the stable world order from which somebody has pushed us out. That's gone. And so, in answer to your question, we you know, where's Paul Nitze? Okay, and the next president's going to need Paul Nitze, or the equivalent of the long telegram, to kind of scope how fundamental the issues have now become. And until we do that, we're going to be doing this for a long time.
In the back over there.
Hi.
Thank you, Rahim Rashidi with Kurdistan TV. In your opinion, General, after Paris and the Brussels attacks, how important is it the Peshmerga should be armed? And in your opinion, how did ISIS originate? Thank you.
I think that's called a leading question in the American court system. And so if it actually ties very closely, though, thank you, to what I just said. All right? So, and this is me being critical of policy, which is not quite the traditional intelligence officer's role, but here goes. So if you believe what I just said about Iraq not existing, all right, why would you insist on approval from Baghdad before you send arms to Erbil? Right? And so my instincts, and look, I understand it. If I'm still back in government and still in the sit room, one has to be careful what one says and how one does things. But my instincts are, if this is all about a new structure in the Middle East, I think a pretty useful building block would be the Kurds. Okay? Now I realize all of a sudden all my Turkish friends are getting concerned, and Iraqi friends and Syrian friends and so on. But if the old is gone, all right, and the new is yet to be created, I think a good conversation to have is, what is the future of the Kurdish people and the Kurdish Autonomous Region and the other Kurdish Autonomous Region, the one in Syria now? So I would not constrain myself to the old models. And then how did ISIS come about? Long history. The most recent one I will tie to the American departure in 2011. And as we left, this is not that we would have defeated ISIS, we're going to use our kids to kill them. No, it was simply that we were an effective stopper in a bottle that was still unsettled. That while we were there, the three factions in Iraq still distrusted, each of the three distrusted the other two, but were reasonably convinced that as long as the Americans were there in some numbers, the other two weren't going to eat them. Okay? And as soon as we left, they all suddenly feared that they were going to eat them and began to move to their respective corners and act in ways they thought were defensive, but were perceived by the other two factions as being horrifically offensive. And that created the seed, the petri dish for ISIS to resurrect. So
Let's take two more, and then Mike has agreed to sign some books outside. So this gentleman right there.
Talking about rules of engagement you mentioned earlier. Mike. Back in the day. Back in the day, what were the rules of engagement, or the rules for a rendition to a third country somewhere?
We had to have assurances from the third country, and assurances we believed that that the prisoner would indeed be treated humanely. And then we embraced both a moral and legal obligation to ensure that that is indeed what happened. Now, and I do get the question from time to time is, but how could you be sure? And the answer I would give you would be, well, after all, CIA is an intelligence organization. And so those are the ground rules. Now, the current administration, by the way, that rendition policy, same today, okay? It didn't, no, there's a little more noise about, and we insist on guarantees and so on, which I find a little off-putting, like somehow we weren't concerned as much about the law as the current guys. There is powerful continuity in U.S. rendition program. And despite what Mark teed up for me, and I happily answered, there is powerful continuity between 43 and 44. There really is. One of the things the Europeans remark on is not how much President Obama is different from President Bush, but how much he is so much like President Bush when it comes to the war on terror. And I would offer you the view that there's a bigger difference between 43-1 and 43-2, the first and second Bush administration, than there is between 43 and 44. Now, all that said, I could fill the rest of the afternoon complaining about the things that were changed. But I have to freely admit the powerful continuity, the great line that I quote in there after Snowden, but it applies to everything. It's a quote in Spiegel, in which a European, a German, is deeply lamenting. We thought it was just George Bush. we thought there were two Americas. Now we know there is just one America. To which I respond, cool, all right? but was stress producing for a lot of people who are our friends in Europe.
Last question.
Lady way in the back.
Lady way in the back.
Thank you, General Hayden. You had mentioned some limitations.
Who are you, by the way?
My name's Christine Frizzau. I'm with Sinclair Broadcast Group. You mentioned some limitations from some of our European counterparts in terms of sort of this fight on terrorism, especially as it relates to intelligence. Does this mean it's time for the U.S. to have a larger global role, and would Europe be okay with that?
Well, actually, I guess my argument is we do have a large global role, and we have stepped into that. And what I would be inviting is that we not be the lone striker dribbling the ball into the attack zone, that we actually got somebody on either wing who we could occasionally pass the ball to take my extended soccer metaphor, even one more revolution. In that, we have the sincere conversation with our putative teammates about the midfield, and that, you know, you realize this, we can argue about specifics, but this is not the forces of darkness trying to suppress European privacy. All right, so let's do that one again. All right, with maybe a better understanding of what it was, and then with regard to this definition, if you think you can handle this problem at the Greek border and make it go away, you're wrong. And therefore, why don't you come up here and start playing a little ball in the offensive zone too? All right, and you know, we don't have much time, and it's coming out harsh. All right, but this is a conversation among people who fundamentally share our values and who share our interests, and with whom we should be able to have these conversations. And so it is time for us to do this. Okay, at that German embassy thing I was talking about. I'm hitting this pretty hard about, no, we feel comfortable doing this, and I'm getting pushback. And finally, Ambassador Sharroth, this is related in the book, Ambassador Sharroth wants to kind of find some common cause, all right? And so I'm standing next to him talking to the gathered ambassadors, and he looks up at me and says, well, General, I mean, surely you must admit that we're all children of the Enlightenment. And I said, oh, yes, sir, Mr. Ambassador, but you Europeans seem to be hugging Locke a lot, and we're over here with Hobbes, which are two great Enlightenment philosophers that our common culture and civilization embrace. And so why can't we begin to share our somewhat more Hobbesian view of this problem with their somewhat more Lockean view? It is, after all, part of our mainstream. Sorry, I sound like the philosophy professor now. I apologize.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking questions. We're going. Thank you. Mike has agreed to sign books outside, so if everyone could remain seated just for a sec while we get him out to the table, and then you can ask him your questions as he signs your book. Thank you very much.
Thanks for accommodating. I used to go when I played football. I didn't always get the hole, but I tried to. For a time. Where's the signing book? The lawyer's here. Fine. He's talking about continuity. He's doing administration. The rhetoric greatly changes over the last 20 years. We policed in the Gulf, we policed in Alaska, one in the Pacific, one in the Atlantic. No matter what, they end up in the same posture, saluting whatever what they perceive to be the prevailing sentiments in various states. But anyway, we're some places, not everywhere. Saying that Jeb Bush was governor, George Bush didn't want to bring problems to his brother. And or California, because they have a lot of electoral votes, or etc. And perhaps this president announced it on it's not hard. You gotta let Ken sit back. To the credit for protecting that from
The reasons aren't rational.
well, they are. Policy always fun. Nice. How's it going, Lauren? How you doing? Oh, no, he's very good.
I noticed that DOI.
Yes, Warren and I work together. They had to have a name to put on it. I'm not here. In fact, this is my day off.
I didn't know you were heading nationalist.
Yeah, I really do say you're not representing the department, but
Therefore, I'm Italian.
Oh, totally.
So I came here to Detroit and get a little flavor of Washington.
How you doing?
I know I'm John.
He's
I'm
South Korean American.
You know, I wanted to ask him. You know, Trump made a charge earlier that the Iraqi invasion was the trigger point that the Iran 14 years dissolution. And I was just wondering what his reaction to that claim to my question.
He said it was in the body.
I would feel like not to bring Trump for that. Okay, yeah.
Depends on whether you
I mean, like,
perceive it.
let's be honest. If someone goes to the U.S. and starts, I don't think any of us can actually. Well, it is really the fact that if someone invaded the U.S., like, you know, I don't know.
Tempting. You're right.
No,
We should have foreseen
I don't know if you're but I could very easily see now what it is. I could very easily understand why they're fighting troops, but it should stop that. That's it. I'm not sure. Mass shooting.
probably did. Oh, I know my boss is her boss is there. It's a wonderful thing. So, China needs, I guess you've run out of children to name after famous people.
You know what our next one would be?
What's next?
All right.
So it's got to be a boy then, right?
No. Or it could be a dog. I named dogs. Dog, girl, boy.
Yeah.
I might rename him. I don't know.
Philip is junior class president out of Ohio and is heading off in a month or two. Boy State, hopes to be elected back.
Nice. Where is Boy State?
Boy State.
Watch the kids.
Where is that? I did that in New Mexico. Oh, yeah, yeah. And does that last a week? Boy State? Yeah. I did that 4 years ago. It's a leadership thing, and everybody goes and they have talks.
It's hard to imitate the state of the voice of the sun.
We went down to the New Mexico military. You heard of that in MMI? That's where we had Boys State.
Wow. Well, that must have been a really important.
Guess where the money's betting on, guess where they go to college? Kids say GMI.
All right.
Got the haircut, so now we gotta get the rest. We gotta get the rest behind it.
Good old military discipline.
You know, that's why Richard Marquez won.
Oh, is that right?
All right, well, Mac.
Well, I have sufficient confidence. Traffic parking meter.
While he is in Saudi Arabia, a big, huge problem.
Mobile objects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's where they use high tech.
I didn't say it today, but you could make a case that they made a deal with the devil in 1979 after the occupation of the Grand Mosque and determined that nobody was going to get to their religious right. Okay, thank you. Jonathan? John. That'll be good. Sir, a question for you. Go ahead. Mosul Dam in Iraq, if that were to decay to the point of failure, what do you think the effect would be with the current fight against ISIS?
Good boy. I bought it. Dang, I put it on my desk.
Catastrophic.
Well, you didn't put it on your dashboard?
It's hard to imagine things getting worse, and then they do. Thank you. Thank you. Hi. GULFI.
Yes, you got your problem up now. Pakistani Doctor Association.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So you spoke highly of you.
That's kind. Thank you.
Might I get a picture with you? I can send
Sure.
it to him.
Sure.
Those are great. 10% of this game was there too.
Yeah.
I studied under Michael Schroeder at Georgia.
Did you really? Crazy Mike?
Oh, he was a great professor though.
I'm sure he is.
He was terrific.
Okay, where's the camera? Okay, here we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you.
meeting you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
Okay, what do we got here? Let's go.
Indeed.
Okay.
Very bold question. Is there a way I can contact you for some questions?
Through the Chertoff group. Okay, I don't have any cards with me, but it's easily done through the Chertoff group.
I'll check it out.
Thank you.
What's the best event in Washington, D.C. I've visited in 1.5 months?
That's very kind.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you. Here you go. Thanks, Pascal.
Thank you, sir.
I'm actually an intern at Memory. Steve
Oh, did you
Eagle.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they send their best wishes. So
Thank
these
you.
books are actually for them.
Okay.
So one's for Steve and one's for Eagle.
You go? Okay.
They're both unfortunately traveling today. Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you. Dr. Steve?
Yep.
Let's see what's sure. What record you got? There you go. Thank you. Good seeing you. Thanks, Peter. Hi. No.
If you would, to my skeptical friend, I worked for Nemo here in Shockley before he became way down in the weeds, before he became rich and famous. And I thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Not that I'm skeptical about anything you said, I'm skeptical about all the things you have to go through.
There you go.
All right.
Okay, no, thank you. Thanks.
Continue your good work.
Thanks, that's kind. Hi.
You sought out a book, so I want to buy one, so I'm going to have to buy one later. I just want to thank you.
Available on Amazon.com.
Yes, and I'm actually one of the editors for a new journal called Providence. I believe you might have
I got it, yeah.
Great.
Thank you. I enjoyed paging through
So,
it. So you guys are writing a review here pretty soon,
Yes,
right?
we're Peace Publishing doing
Good.
one.
Thank you.
But thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for so much. Thank you. Hello. Okay, so you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you think if you
Thank you.
like a few minutes interview with us?
We can do it very quickly. We'll see how it ends up here, okay?
We just want to ask your opinion on your comment.
I'm sorry, sir.
You're killing me here.
I'm actually going to say hi. My name's
Forum. Hi.
Daniel Titles Organization.
Oh my goodness.
And,
Yeah.
I'm also one of the Heritage Foundation's Marshall Fellows, so I believe we'll actually be talking to you later. You're talking to, I believe.
I am. I think it's September.
Yeah, so I'll meet you then. I just
Okay.
wanted to say hi.
Good. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Hopefully to...
And you're a marshal, right?
Yeah. Anyhow, it'd be, thanks for all your work, and I look forward to meeting you again in the
Okay.
future.
Good. Thank you. Okay. Hi.
Hi, I enjoyed your talk.
Thanks.
So I couldn't, you were out of books, but
Okay.
if you could make it to Reagan. That's my daughter, Reagan. She's named after the president. And she's working as a staffer for Congressman on the Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Foreign Relations.
I had dinner with him about a month ago.
Did you? And my niece's husband also works at the NSA. So I guess my question I wanted to ask was, what would you comment on, not so much informing, but educating the public so that they know how to vote wisely in November?
You know, that gets back to the educational system and teaching civics and teaching people how things work. And I actually talk about it in the book. The most important thing for me in later life with these really high-powered positions is I really had a great education through the 12th grade. I mean, traditional, Catholic, parochial, liberal arts, basic subject, high-demand education. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hi. Okay.
But you also you legitimize the mind of the public.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay. You want a signature? Okay.
My point was that by equating people out there and that's kind of seems to me what's happening.
You're talking about hijab and other things? We have rules against that? We don't.
Let me tell you why. I think we say everybody has to be free for their religion as far as they practice the religion in their house. And that is practicing religion out of the house. They're practicing their religion in the street.
That's the difference between the American system and the French, or the American system and the Turkish system. We do permit, we allow religion in the public square. We do.
But normally, okay, so instead of stop letting them come to the country and put everybody in danger.
Well, this is a longer conversation. It's cutting against the grain of our traditional values. Yeah, so.
Well, at the time that we put that rule, there was no terrorists.
No, yes, but I do not want to equate anyone with a hijab as being a potential terrorist.
Do you know about Islam?
I try. As much as a Christian can.
As far as I know, it has everything to do with hijab. It has everything to do with hijab.
Okay, let me go on. Yeah.
John, good to meet you.
Hi.
I worked for you a long time ago, 95, just out of school. And then every time I moved somewhere, you left. So
Since down to Texas?
And so I was in Texas. I was over at Fort Meade for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, good seeing you. Thanks for saying hi. Hi.
Hi, my name's Dimitri.
Thank you. Hi. Good to see you. Thank you.
I really like the metaphor. And
soccer?
Yeah, soccer metaphor. And so, I mean, before this comment, it's kind of maybe ironic that your book sold out before this, so you'll hear why it might be ironic. But when you said goals, it made me think about the sustainable development goals.
Yes.
So I think that I hope...
Back to my change the facts on the ground. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You've got to change what creates this problem.
Yeah, there's an interesting piece in the BBC yesterday about these guys. I lived in Brussels in the early 2000s, and these guys who were 15, 16 yell at us about Americans, how they hate Americans. But anyways, what I'm getting at is that maybe I agree with you that the global order is changing, and we might be moving on, but I think the UN will play a big role, and instead of using our collective action to kill each other or fight over territory, we might be using to achieve goals that are curing cancer, that are eradicating poverty, etc. So I hope we can work towards that instead of killing each other. Nice to meet you.
Wait, remember, I said everything there about with regret. What?
Justin says it's time.
Okay, so you got 30 seconds. 1 minute. Here we go. We're done. I got it. I'll just hold it. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm very fond of saying my friends in this part of the world are the Kurds. They welcome Americans. They've begun a very impressive project of development in the Kurdish autonomous region. And so I think it's a wise step in American foreign policy to deepen our relationships with the people who seem to share our values, who seem to want to be friends with the United States, and who frankly have a military that when the fight begins shows up for the fight.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. I appreciate it, General.
Thank you. All right, you had a question about Hong Kong. Here we go.
Yes. You comment on China about cyber. Can you elaborate a little bit more on China will be the greatest?
Sure. What I said about the relationship between China and the United States is by far the most important geostrategic question we have to face and solve. And this is not me calling the Chinese an enemy. I don't mean that at all. I mean a country so large, emerging onto the world stage as China is a relationship that we have to get right for the stability of the entire planet. It would be catastrophic if the relationship between Beijing and Washington ended up as continuous confrontation, always bordering on conflict, like the relationship we used to have with the Soviet Union.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
I'll just do one picture.
Okay, take it.
Here you go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm leaving now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want names about who underordered the books, too. Oh, I'm sorry, Director. I'm sorry. Okay, what are we doing?
I just want to picture something. You guys pull the trigger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, there we go.
Can you just turn sideways? You can look that whole.
No, I understand.
No, you just look through the hole. It's okay, just pull the trigger.
Okay. Okay. Work your ears now?
Yes, it is, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. Video.
Former NSA Director General Michael Hayden there signing books after his discussion and Q&A on national security. And tonight we'll take a look at anti-Muslim groups in the U.S. and how they've become mainstream with Duke University sociology professor and author